So then we come to the next speaker here, and the next speaker is Daniele Ape from the European Chemicals Agency in Helsinki. And we're very happy that Daniele could come in person this year. He was already presenting several times in this earlier User Conference and User Conference this year, but last year it was only online. So just for those who have never heard about him, he's a master's degree in environmental science, and he's a scientific officer at ECHA for a rather long time, almost from the beginning of the agency there, has worked with different aspects, and the first time that we came in contact where you were responsible for the guidance documents, as I remember, the general. And since 2018, he moved in with a focus on this poison center notification team and all the processes and the work and the working groups that we met many times together since that time there. It's mainly responsible for regulatory issues or regulatory topics, but also technical aspects. You cannot resolve this, of course, in all this time. And we have already a long time that we worked together in this. And one thing I remember especially was in January 2019, when we both were talking about this kind of project or kind of, I think, in Zagreb. No? And we both were there and explained what PCN is and what's the solution in Germany. And at that time, I explained that your surname, Ape, does not mean ape, but it does mean bee in Italy. So he comes from Italy there. This is quite important to know. So Daniele will also focus this year on the frequently asked questions from the ECHA help desk, give an overview about the presentation and the work of ECHA on this thing here, and we are very keen on hearing the latest updates there. Daniele, thank you. Maybe you should take this, then we could whatever you want.
Use this.
I think this may be technically easier.
Okay. And the slider moved by... can I move the slide or...?
Point to it, over there, just you missed this.
This one, okay.
Just press one. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Herbert, and good afternoon to everyone. So thank you for the presentation and for the invitation. It's really always nice and important for us to be here. I could come only myself in person, but my colleagues, Heidi Razikari, and also some other colleagues from the help desk, they are following from online. It's important for us, in particular because of the audience, the German stakeholders, both authorities and industries are very much important for us. We work very, very well together. And I'm very happy, actually pleased about the collaboration and the support that we got. I will focus on first of all, the first news of my presentation is that for once there are no news, at least not from the regulatory side and very little from the technical side. So no new, I will not report anything about new obligations or big changes in the IT tools. So I will present a bit the ECHA perspective of how things have been going, what was our role, what we have been working for the implementation of this regulation. And then the main focus will be one of the main our activities, which is supporting the industry and authorities. So in particular, the role of the help desk. And as Herbert was mentioning, I will talk a bit about the main issue that the industry is faced now. So we know, just a bit of introduction, we know that all this is not new, and it was not new even before Annex 8. And the role of ECHA, the main task was to agevolate, to benefit the harmonization. So the harmonization is the key. So what we were asked was to work towards a full harmonization. In particular, by making sure that the same information is available to all the poison centers across Europe. And what the regulation asked us to do in particular was the provision of a format, so the same format to be used across Europe, and to facilitate also the identification of the mixture through this famous unique UFI that was mentioned before. Of course, we went further than that. So what we made available are a series of optional tools, in particular the possibility to prepare a submission, a dossier via a central system, the possibility to include the format in the own industry system, this on demand, of course, if industry wishes to do so. And we made available also for the appointed bodies and in certain country poison center this searchable database for those who actually want it, need it. As we know, as we learned today, or we knew already, some of the member states have their own. And finally, some of the member states have the possibility to receive automatically the information in their own database. Quickly, history, as I said, started well before the introduction of Annex 8. There was a big variety of format information available in requirement. So exactly what the main point of all this exercise was to try to harmonize and to facilitate these requirements. Annex 8 was published in 2017, but entered into force a bit later, so we worked very well and quite a lot together with our stakeholders, as Herbert was mentioning. We established different working groups where both industry and authorities were part of it. So the main point, the milestone was 2019, the beginning of 2019, when the submission portal went live. And from that point onwards, we started talking about harmonized notification and real Annex 8 notification. The central database for the appointed body was live at the end of the same year. Then before the first compliance date, we kept working. As we know, there were 2 amendments of Annex 8, so we worked in order to be able to implement those new solutions and this new requirement until the first compliance date, 2021, where we started seeing really the things in the real life, and the obligation actually really kicked in. After that, now we're going toward the second compliance date, but we don't expect big changes, even if we know that CLP is under revision. For Annex 8 itself, we don't expect huge changes. So now we are actually working, we are stabilizing the system. As I said, no big news, no changes at the moment. We are working in maintenance, basically, trying to improve the system, but we are not expecting any new big developments. So what's the situation now after 2 years? I tried to give an overview. We have many different figures and data we could collect and present. This is just to give you an idea of the activities. These are all the submissions we received since the beginning, since the go live of the portal until now. Of course, there was a huge peak before the first compliance date when people started a bit panicking a few days before, when they realized that the things was really happening. Then more or less, yeah, it keeps varying, but we are still receiving more than 100,000 submissions. Sorry, don't want to confuse because we use both this terminology, but let's stick to submission. All the member states are receiving notification. Unfortunately, as I will mention soon, we are not yet there to the full harmonization or implementation of the Annex 8 in all the member states. There are still 2 which they have some problem in onboarding, but for the rest, all the member states are receiving notification in the new format. And of course, I mean, it's not a surprise that the country with the highest activities are Italy, Germany, and France. How industry can submit notification? Mainly in 3 ways. The easiest one for mainly small company with small portfolio is using the cloud. So everything is in the cloud. You can prepare, submit, and store your submission and do everything in the cloud. Of course, only a small percentage of submission they happen through this tool, because as I said, is a convenient way mainly for small company with small portfolio. A bit more notification, they are prepared offline. You can download Euclid offline, and then you can upload and submit the notification. Here the downside is that you have to take care of the updates and upgrade Euclid whenever there is a new release, while if you work in the cloud, of course, this happens automatically. The vast majority of submission happen through the so-called system-to-system. And this is actually the choice for the biggest company, the company with many notifications, because this means that the notification dossier can be created in the company-owned system and then automatically submitted through the portal. And I will spend a few words about the system-to-system a bit later. With regard to the other side of the flow, so the receiving appointed body, a poison centers, I think this table that we have on our website was mentioned already, is this overview table. We think it's quite useful, and we try to keep it as much up to date as possible, and contains all the information about the implementation of Annex 8 in the different countries. As you will see, we are not there yet to the full harmonization. There are 2 countries missing for legal, technical, logistical problems. Unfortunately, we are a bit late, but most of the other countries, and eventually also these 2 missing countries, will accept notification through the submission portal. The appointed body, some of them receive the submission via this e-delivery, so they don't access the central database, but we deliver to them, to their own database directly, all the submission. And this table contains information about in which country is applying fees and which language. I think there was some question about it. In this table, all this information is included. And also when you can consider your product fit for the market following the notification. So everything is in this table. Now let's switch to the main point of my presentation, which is the support. So where and how you can get support. The main tool is, of course, the help desk. And I will also mention some of the main topics that we have selected, and to see what's the possible solution. The ECHA help desk can be contacted via this contact form. We have different entries for authorities and industry. They have been both updated. I think the authority side is not, the updated version is not live yet, but will come soon. And it's very important from this first point to highlight the fact that we are working together with the national help desk. So the ECHA help desk is not the only point of contact. Actually, the national help desk should be your first point of contact. We have reworked a bit our procedure. The help desk has reworked the procedure together with the national help desk, so they are aware of that. And we have made a bit more clear which are the questions that should be addressed to the national member states first and to ECHA afterwards. And we have been trying to empower more and more the national help desk over the year, and we think now it's time also for Annex 8 to empower the national help desk a bit more, for different reasons. And one is that you can get support in your national language, and there are still some particularities across the member state that is, so the national help desk are better placed to answer some of the questions. This applies for all the regulation. Of course, I don't go through all the regulation. We can focus a bit more maybe on CLP and poison center, but in general, the national help desk now are requested to deal with regulatory and scientific questions from both EU and non-EU companies, while ECHA normally should deal more with something more related to the task, like, for example, evaluation for REACH, or disputes, or substance of very high concern dossier, or submissions. In general, something that, of course, ECHA is dealing with. The criteria for the distribution are basically based on the member state where the company is based, or in case of non-EU company, it's based on the country of import activities. I want to highlight that ECHA is monitoring this, how many questions are delivered to which country. And we are trying to monitor and to monitor the workload and the number of questions that each country is receiving. But let's focus a bit more on PCN. So who should you contact in case of need? In general, even if we know there are gray areas, there are always gray areas, and we are in contact with the national help desk, so we can always help each other and forward the question. But in general, question about the regulation and the scope, for example, what needs to be notified, who needs to be notified, and the roles of the actor in the supply chain, those should go first to the national help desk. The same also the preparation of the dossier, so which information you are supposed to include in the dossier. So this should be addressed to the national help desk first. After you have submitted whatever problem you have after the submission, of course, we are dealing and we build the submission system, so then we can deal with all the problems that you have upon submission. For example, with the business rule, why I'm failing, or a technical problem. As I said, there are a gray area, and in general, when things are clear from a regulatory perspective, then the question should go to the national help desk. For you, good to know, if you don't know, there is a network of national help desk working together and together with us in order to try to harmonize all the question and answers and to find solution and agreement when something is not clear. Then if the regulation, if there is some interpretation in the regulation which still has to be done, then we deal with it together with Commission and authorities, but as long as the requirements have been harmonized and interpretation are there, then the national help desk should be able to answer. Some quick, simple example of question that should be addressed to the national help desk first. Obligation of different actors in the supply chain. For example, we often have question about toll formulator, who is placing on the market and who has the obligation to notify. Issue with non-EU suppliers or issues with the suppliers in general, with sharing information that can be dealt with by the national help desk and not necessarily by ECA, and not only non-EU suppliers, also EU suppliers. We see this question that I might get only the STS or I don't get enough information. So these are all issues that are to be referred to the national help desk first. ECA, we would prefer to deal mainly with, for example, business rule failure or issues with messages. When you receive quality rules or a business rule, a warning message, an error message, if there is something unclear, we are there to help you, also because we may realize there is the need to change or to fix something. So we can help you to fix the dossier, to get through the system. Member state implementation status. We understood that it's much easier for you to have only one point of contact, even if in principle the information should come from the competent authorities. We are in contact with them. We always ask, remind the appointed body, competent authorities, please let us know if you have any updated information, if something has changed with regard to the implementation of Annex 8. We collect this information, or we are even there helping them from a technical point of view, legal and technical point of view, and we collect all this information in the overview table. So these are questions that you can ask us. And then there is this so-called system-to-system option. Of course, we are dealing with it. So if there is any question or the need to connect with this system, of course you should contact us. Now the question, they get to the national help desk, normally preferably directly from the customer, but also since we keep receiving many questions that should actually be sent to the national help desk, we will redirect the customer. So you will often receive a question for answer from us. Please ask this question first to your national help desk. As I said, we keep track of the number and queries which we redistribute, and we are always in contact with the national help desk in case of support. I mentioned the HelpNet network, but in general, when you go to the national help desk, then you come to us. We always try to agree or talk to the national help desk before replying something that may be not in line with what they have replied. And this is okay, this is just for information, it's an overview of the inquiries that we receive, just to have an idea of the activities, of the amount of work. Here you can see the difference between the CLP regulatory and PCN regulatory. And then the PCN technical, actually, most of the questions are normally technical, even more than regulatory. Sorry. Because as I said, we hope that most of the regulatory doubts are now solved. So most of the questions are about submission. Actually, often a business rule or some problem in submitting the information. Now let's see a selection of main issues, main questions that we receive. The first one is about actually many of them are about information flow and getting the proper information, enough information to be able to fulfill Annex 8 requirement. One of the current issues is about identification of the mixture in mixtures. And the fact is important to remember that some of the, if a mixture is used in the formulation of another mixture downstream, and this final mixture is used for other purposes than industrial, then even the original mixture has to be notified as a professional consumer. So we have problem with customers saying, I get this business rule because my supplier has notified the mixture that I use as a MIM only as an industrial use. So this is very important because the relevant use depends on the final use of the mixture. So if you're using a MIM, this MIM has to be notified according to the final use. And so that means this MIM cannot be notified with a limited submission. The way forward is simply to request the supplier to update the notification, so the communication information flow is always the key. Because otherwise you cannot use the UFI to notify the MIM. And even if there may be workaround, your supplier should be reminded that they may not be in compliance with the regulation because they are submitting something basically wrongly. So therefore their mixture is not used for industrial use only. Another current information issue, and question we are receiving is about asset transfer. So the notification, the Annex 8 notification itself is not an asset that you can transfer in case of merging or acquisition of legal entities. It seems counterintuitive when a company buys another company who has notified some mixture that you cannot simply transfer these assets. Basically, there is no asset transfer functionality available. And even if, I can anticipate the fact that ECA is working towards a kind of modularized submission system in the long-term project, and some kind of asset transfer module. It is used, for example, for REACH, that it may be available for PCN. With PCN, the situation is particular because the information is not owned by ECA, it's delivered to the member state. Some of the member states, they don't even access the central database, they have their own database. So we cannot simply change the information, the legal entity information. And in any case, when something changes, you have to submit an update in any case. So the only solution at the moment is to make a new submission from the new legal entity account containing the new legal entity information. So there's no easy way to just switch the legal entity owner. We always remind that a data set can be shared, so you don't necessarily need to restart populating the dossier from scratch, but the data set, they can be always exported and re-imported. Another point we want to make clear, we realized, I think, maybe discussing with the German colleague, if I remember well, the problem with the legal entity information changes, because even if the company remains the same, sometimes there may be the need to change the legal entity information in your ECA account. Even the name of the company may slightly change or completely change. And there's no, this information, when you submit an update, is not reflected automatically, not always reflected automatically in the dossier. So you have the legal entity information of the submitting legal entity from the ECA account, while associated to the main mixture in the dossier, there are still the old data. So when you change something and you submit an update, this information in the dossier is not automatically updated. So you have to be careful and go within the data set. There is a legal entity associated to the main mixture and change this information also there. So you have to proactively make the changes in the dossier before submitting the update. And this is important because the appointed body may see a discrepancy between the submitter legal entity name and the duty holder legal entity name. Another bit more technical issue, but we receive quite often, question of how I can export Euclid databases, so dataset. Basically, we call dataset all the information which makes up the dossier. Some company for business need, they may want to switch from existing Euclid installation, for example, from the local to the cloud and vice versa. And Euclid allows you to export and import batches of data sets, so not one by one necessarily. You can select export and import directly batches of data set into your Euclid installation. So then it's important to remember you should export all the records which are connected, for example, the legal entity. It's a bit more technical, this one, but just to highlight that if you need to pass from one way of submitting to another, there is the possibility, and this is explained quite well in the Euclid manual, to export in bulk the information and the dossier. And then this is something that is a problem often for us, managing the submission system. We have had in the recent past, problem with companies submitting via system to system, so basically from their own product management system through the portal in an automatic way, submitting many dossiers which for different reasons may fail. And some of the systems, they keep automatically submitting the same dossier simply because it fails. So the system, there's no human intervention, and the system keeps submitting the same file, hopefully waiting for a successful submission. But this is a problem for us because it jams basically the system. We have a system made in different queues, and if some of these queues they get jammed, then of course all other companies they cannot submit either. One of the reasons, for example, recently we had a case of a system. The submission, they failed because of a UFID format incorrect. And it's funny because the UFI, if you look at it, was correct, but the system somehow, and I don't know how, it was generating like hidden characters, so that you don't see it. For some reason it's possible, I've learned. But the system kept submitting the same dossier multiple times. We could not even contact the company because it was August. They were on holiday, and we were receiving thousands of notifications, hundreds of thousands of notifications, and they kept failing. So we just asked to please, if you have this automatic submission system in place, put in place also an alert system, possibly blocking the notification if after a certain number of failure in a short period of time, they keep happening. For the reason that I said before, our system may get seriously jammed. And the only way for us would be to introduce even new business rule and keep failing. But we think that before failing or before working on new business rule, since the number of companies is not very high, we prefer to contact those companies for the moment. Now, another current issue is mentioned before in general is in the information flow. So there's a problem with downstream users, lack of information about the composition or meme identification, and problems in fulfilling your obligation. This is the main reason is the lack of information or exchange of information flow. And this is not only from the supplier to the customer about the composition, but it may be also from the customer to the supplier about their intention. The supplier may be unaware of the use you're making of this meme. And here the main solution here is to improve the communication and be clear that if you are using this mixture as a meme for a consumer professional use, this information should arrive to the supplier so they can make a correct notification. But of course you could even make best use of UFI. We talked about the UFI before. For the moment, it's true that the full potential of the UFI is not clear, simply because the system is still in the implementation. Maybe after the last compliance date and the end of the transitional period, hopefully we will see the full potential of this UFI, but the UFI can be used also to protect the confidential business information, basically. Also for problem with non-EU supplier that can be solved via a voluntary submission from a legal entity appointed by the non-EU supplier, so they can provide a UFI to the European customer. Now, the help desk, national help desk and ECA help desk are, of course, two very important support sources for both authorities and in particular industry, but we have produced during this year together with you, actually together with industry and authorities, a series of other support tools. The main point of reference from our point of view is the ECA website. Here you can find access to a support section. When you have the regulatory guidance, you have a series of Q&As which have been discussed and agreed among the national help desk. You have videos, and then you have the contact form. You have then another series of sections where you can find support to actually prepare the dossier, so the practical guide for dossier preparation, and then you have the access to the portal, of course. You have a bit more technical information for those who want to implement or to include the format in their own system. So you have the format guide for developers, and you have also, we keep up to date the list of validation rules which are currently implemented. You have access to the UFI generator and the UFI validator. Also the UFI algorithm can be included, implemented in your own system. There are information about the European product categorization system with all the detail, how it works, and how a guide, how to select the correct category. And finally, there is a new revised, updated section on how to access the system-to-system service with all the information about that. Some of the support tools are available in German as well as in all the EU languages. In particular, in the summer, we published the translation of the regulatory guidance document, which was last updated in April this year. Also, the practical guide on dossier preparation is available in all languages on our website. Maybe a few words on this system-to-system support. Is a service, as I said, is available for companies that want to use their own system. So the PCN-Format can be included in your own internal existing IT system. You can prepare the dossier in your system without the need to use Euclid, for example, or the cloud. And then basically is a key which allows you to automatically transfer the dossier to the ECA submission portal. Of course, the only downside of this solution is that the validation is possible only upon submission, while if you're using Euclid or the cloud, you can validate your dossier before submitting. And then, of course, if there are updates, that needs to be maintained by the users. We have provided. But this system is not used only to fulfill Annex 8 obligation. They use only for other regulatory purposes. But there are support pages, as I say, they've been just updated, revised, with a manual for you to explain what it is and how to access this system. Of course, terms and conditions, developer's guide to explain how to include the Euclid format, and then you will get also news about this system. Here there is the link actually to the specific page. We have then, I want to mention LinkedIn groups, because nowadays social media are very powerful. ECA is making full use of them. In particular, there are 3 LinkedIn groups which are working, we believe, quite well. So if you are interested, you are always, if you're not already part of this group, you can ask to become member. There are 3 which are relevant here. One is the actually specifically ECA's Poison Center notification group, specifically on Annex 8. There's a ECA system-to-system submission support network in LinkedIn. As I said, because it's not only relevant for PCN, but also for other regulatory purposes. And then a more general ECA Euclid group. I think they are quite useful because you can get updates and news live. You can ask, we are monitoring it constantly, so you can ask questions, regulatory and technical questions, and actually you can find also answer to common questions. There may be someone who has asked already questions which you want to ask as well. And it's important, we have seen, because it allows actually the user and the member to share experiences. Sometimes we don't even need to answer because some other members actually intervene and helps you find the solution to your problem. Now, I conclude with a few words on what happens next from our point of view. The PCN solution, since we don't expect big changes, has switched to a maintenance mode. We believe that all the features that support you in fulfilling your obligation are there. Of course, we will continue working on it, but mainly the idea is to mainly fix bugs and problems, or correct something if it's necessarily wrong. And there are no major developments foreseen. What we are focusing now is more on the validation rule, because we have still quite a relatively long backlog of rules that needs to be either fixed or still developed, that we have discussed actually and agreed with a specific working group. We are monitoring the CLP revision because we say the CLP revision is ongoing. The annexate itself should be revised only slightly, some minor changes. There may be slightly bigger changes in Article 45, for example, so a better or more complete definition of duty holders. But then there is something which indirectly can affect Annex 8, which are, for example, new other classes. So the scope of Annex 8 may be expanded a bit. Just to mention, but we don't go into detail, the Commission is working only on the concept of online sales because it is a big issue. Nowadays, most of the products are sold online, and what comes outside EU may be sold online and has to fulfill the legal requirement, including the poison center notification. So the working group we were working with originally have been merged. Now we have one single PCN stakeholder group. It has regular meetings now, and we use it mainly to share information. There will be actually, like every year, a release in October, but we have switched the main format changes from October to April. So there are no major format changes. There may be, I don't know exactly how many because we are still working on it, but some of the agreed validation rule may be implemented, or maybe we are fixing bugs with the previous one. For example, the group submission, most of the rules, there were not very few rules about the group submission, so we hope we will be able to introduce some of them. If you work in Euclid and in the cloud, you will see an improved navigation tree. We try to improve our Euclid team, how the information is visualized, because the tree, they could get very long, and you can get lost where you are in the tree. So now basically the records are expandable, and you can open and close better windows. And also the possibility to reuse existing record. There is a new way of cross-reference with existing records, so you can reuse the same. And that's it, basically. My overview. I don't know the time. I hope I was in.
Perfect.